I do enjoy watching a political campaign go down in flames, if I have to be honest with you.
Especially someone as obnoxious as Eric Swalwell. It's just apex best boy going down in flames is hilarious.
It is April 12th, 2026. Welcome to Over the Loudspeaker. Your host, Nestor, joined by Collin, as always, from the Hayward Herald. Collin, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It's been a very busy weekend for me, but I'm looking forward to being on the other side of it. Weirdly getting back to work, just because my weekend's been that busy. How about you, sir?
Busy weekend as well. There's a busy weekend and week of headlines. We'll jump into those in a second. There's big news that we're going to cover that we just found out about, like literally maybe a couple of minutes ago, that we'll jump into as well. I'm containing myself to not just immediately start talking about it, but we will first jump into the headlines. Collin, take it away with the headlines.
All right, friends. It's April 2026, and I'm Collin Thormoto from the Hayward Herald with your local news headlines. The city addresses pedestrian deaths with traffic plan. In an effort to address the string of pedestrian fatalities from February, the City Council heard plans to increase safety on a number of critical intersections. 10 intersections throughout the city were identified for so-called quick build solutions, which use inexpensive materials like paint and plastic bollards to be implemented in the next 6 months. The report also included more extensive plans ranging from 6 months to more than 3 years out. The Hayward Police Department also revealed targeted enforcement efforts along high injury corridors for the next 3 months. Local advocates and the city council supported the changes, but recognized that there can be vocal pushback from the community. Keep installing traffic calming, council member Zermeño said. I don't care what they say, end quote. Grocery store fire leaves a restaurant in limbo. At the beginning of April, the newly founded Great Indian Grocery Market caught fire, damaging the adjacent Thai Vietnamese restaurant Red Chili. Red Chili has been a staple in South Hayward at the corner of Mission and Industrial for over 20 years. And while the owners have a second location in San Jose, they admitted that the Hayward location brought in much of their revenue. Quote, it puts more pressure on that store alone to be able to cover all of our expenses, end quote, said the daughter of the owners, Tiffany Ho. Red Chili has no reopening date at this time, but are working to reopen as soon as they can. The CSUEB Spanish program faces trouble. Despite increasing enrollment and a nearly 40% Latine student population, Cal State East Bay President Kathy Sandine announced the closure of the Spanish BA program in 2027, according to the Pioneer Online. Quote, having a BA in Spanish opens doors. People get paid more for not for speaking Spanish, but for holding the credentials to certify they know Spanish, end quote, said Assistant Professor Gabriela Diaz Davalos. However, shortly after the Hayward Herald republished the article from the Pioneer, President Sandine announced that the Spanish BA will be maintained for a further year. If you would like to learn more about these headlines and support what we do, please subscribe at haywardherald.org. The Hayward Herald is your only source of independent Hayward news delivered to your inbox at least twice a week. Please subscribe and share our stories with your friends, family, and neighbors.
Thanks, Collin, for those headlines from last month. The biggest headline, though, that we have to jump into immediately is the ending of, at least for now, Eric Swalwell's how do you always, I never know how to say that.
Gubernatorial
race for California, and maybe his political career.
Yeah.
And this is as of, I don't know what, maybe the last 10, 15 minutes where that we've found this out. Collin, what can you give us a little bit of what maybe that news that just broke has said or
okay,
or is
so
reporting?
I'll start with the new bit, which was as of literally 5:36 p.m. today. Eric Swalwell posted on X, formerly Twitter, I am suspending my campaign for governor. To my family, staff, friends, and supporters, I am deeply sorry for mistakes in judgment I've made in my past. I will fight the serious false allegations that have been made, but that's my fight, not a campaign's. So it sounds like he is not admitting any wrongdoing beyond saying he has made some mistakes, but then also saying that the allegations are false. So for those of you who don't know and haven't been paying attention, these sexual assault allegations have been swirling around our representative for the city of Hayward, Eric Swalwell, for a while now, but have only, I think, less than a week ago, have managed to become actually taken seriously. Is that right, Nestor?
Well, it depends on how that is interpreted. I think what I've read is, since I think it was first covered by SF Chronicle and then CNN, since I read what's come out, it sounds like folks, at least in the Capitol Hill sort of political sphere, have been hearing rumors for a long time about the actions of Eric Swalwell. Now, whether that's exactly what is being reported now, which is pretty serious. The CNN report, I think, it is the alleged rape, at least 2 instances of alleged rape with a former staffer, and at least multiple incidents of sexual harassment of other staffers, where he is sending nude photos, sending messages to former staffers. So I don't know exactly where those two sort of, if those were the rumors that were circulating, or if it's just rumors that, this is I don't know, for lack of a better way of putting it, like a horny dude on Capitol Hill who's always trying to get with the staffers, right? I think there's a sort of kind of a lot there, and so I don't know exactly what has been circulating among the Capitol Hill sort of rumors, but it seems to be, at least now from what I've read in the article that was published in CNN, is that there's pretty damning evidence, or at least pretty, maybe not hard to say whether it's evidence, but at least there's things that are there that are confirmed with the victim, family members of the victim who can corroborate what was said at the time, friends that have messages sort of confirming what happened. So it seems to be pretty damning. I think it was pretty quick to see the politicos, the different endorsements sort of be withdrawn over the past 24 hours, 48 hours, not even, maybe, in which people have been, different elected officials pulling their endorsements, Labor pulling their endorsements pretty quickly. And I think the thing I read this morning, so I believe it was Axios. I don't remember if it was originally reported there, but at least is where I read it. There was a call in Congress now. I think Republican Representative Paulina Luna, is planning to force a vote next week to expel Swalwell. And it looks like, it looks like it may be, I can imagine that it would happen, but I only imagine it happening if it's alongside these other 3 Congress members who are also being investigated for different things. There was a congressman, I believe, from Florida, who also has admitted to having an affair with a staffer who then later took their own life. Another staffer that was found guilty of a whole host of charges, but mostly corruption charges around COVID relief funds. And then another congressional representative who has financial misconduct, campaign finance violations, sexual misconduct, of a whole host of things. So it's at least 4, and it balances out Republican and Democrat. So I think if it was to happen, it would be under the circumstances that all 4 of those members of Congress are expelled, at the very least, censured, which I never understood what that actually does. I don't think it does anything, but
It does very little. It's as close
yeah,
as you can get to a formal reprimand.
yeah.
Like there's the worst case scenario, you lose like committee assignments, which would be kind of a big deal in on Capitol Hill. But I am not super knowledgeable even of what committees Eric Swalwell or any of the other people serve on. So
Well, the major committee, and I don't know if he still serves on that one, is the House Intelligence Committee. It wasn't Swalwell on that committee.
true.
So that was that. It seems like a big deal in terms of that kind of. I don't know his. I always have hard time understanding the rankings and all the what in Congress, but it feels like he had a lot of influence and power in the short time. Well, I guess it hasn't been so short now. It feels short in my mind, but it's been a while now that he's been in Congress. I'm just getting old.
Fair.
But it does feel like this is the sort of domino effect in happening in real life in the moment. We'll see where all the sort of chips end up landing. But
I mean,
I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, for Swalwell, it's really interesting because he's sort of facing because he's got his foot still in the House. He's sort of facing attacks from both sides, right? So he isn't because my understanding would be because he isn't he didn't file to run for his seat again. It was an open seat that he's definitely not going to be in Congress after November or January, I guess, when it switches over. But he would conceivably, after these allegations, if he wasn't pushed out, he would then still serve the remainder of his term. But after that, he'd be completely out of a job unless he got governor. And although he was the one of the two highest polling Democrats, it was him and I believe Matt Mahan, who is the San Jose mayor, if I'm correct, who are polling pretty neck and neck, like within a margin of error of each other pretty consistently. If he might be out, and then Mahan is in a much stronger position. We'll see if Katie Porter can capitalize on that in any meaningful way. But Swalwell's gone. Like if he doesn't get governor, he's out. He did say his campaign was suspended, but that doesn't mean necessarily that it's completely canceled. But I mean, the primary is in the beginning of June. He's got like a month and a half to sort it out. I find it interesting that he's decided to continue to deny the allegations, despite multiple people stepping forward to the point where even the husband, according to USA Today, the husband of the lady who has put her name out there and stepped forward, threatening lawsuits if there's any defamation against his wife, which, I mean, I can understand. But yeah, he's also notably, to talk about how serious this is, it was also the CBS News was covering today that prosecutors in New York City are investigating the assault allegations against Swalwell right now. So this is being taken really seriously. That wouldn't necessarily have an impact in California, but again, it's all smear. So like we had literally what's his name? One of the other House reps from a few years ago, the former comedian who was in like Wisconsin, like he was forced out over like one photograph.
Right.
And Eric Swalwell has seems to have a laundry list of women willing to, like a Trumpian list of women willing to say that he has had some level of misconduct with them. So I don't see his chances being pretty good at this point.
I think it's safe to, well, we know that he'll be on the ballot either way. I think I was reading that this morning, is that he will definitely be on the ballot. Whether or not he's going to get the votes as a result of all, I mean, it seems pretty unlikely that he's going to get any of the votes now, unless something drastic happens to clear his name. I don't see that happening. I'm not surprised by him not admitting to any of the alleged actions, because there is now a DA looking into it, right? So you are not going to say you're guilty on
Right.
in public, right? So, I think the other angle of this, which is not to absolve Eric Swalwell at all, and I'm the last person that is going to be absolving Eric Swalwell for multiple reasons. But I think if you've been on the internet and maybe chronically on the internet, like I have been, you are seeing isn't this interesting timing with everything that's happening? And so what basically people are getting at is this basically a hit job by rival candidates, by the Republicans, the FBI. There was earlier, I think last month or maybe not too long ago, FBI Director Kash Patel was pushing to release files from the investigation in Swalwell's association with another woman who was said to allegedly have been a Chinese spy between the years of 2011 and 2015. So there is some, at least it's a coincidence, right? That this is coming out in this moment in which it works in the favor of Trump and the Republican administration to have basically the person who was, he wasn't polling, he wasn't going to run away with the race, but to have him out gives a Republican a better shot at the governor's seat.
I mean, as long as we're putting our tinfoil hats on, which I am.
I'd love to put a tinfoil hat on. Yes.
I know. I think there is definitely that. I think obviously the Republicans and Donald Trump don't want a strong California governor. They just don't. They want someone who's friendly. Not that I think Eric Swalwell would be like a super leftist governor from his past things, but he has been very combative with the Trump administration, very vocally combative. That's kind of been his brand in the last couple of years. But I do think the timing is interesting. I think there is potentially an alignment of multiple different parties who might all be working toward the same end. Because I think as victims, this is a very advantageous time to do the maximum amount of damage to someone who's harmed you. I'm not going to rule out that this might have been a coordinated thing on their part. That would be pretty amazing, actually. But I also don't want to rule out the idea that, again, Swalwell has put out there. He hasn't named any names, but obviously Matt Mahan is both well positioned as the consistently 1 and 2 in the Democratic Party with him for the seat. He is extraordinarily wealthy. He knows even more wealthy people. He has access to people who have access to the Trump administration through all of his connections in Silicon Valley, since they have aligned themselves very much with the current administration. There's a lot of signs that there's a lot of things that potentially point to that direction. Again, you can't prove anything, but as you said, it is very fortuitous, the timing of this. And there is someone who was running against him actively in a direct way, who has the means, the connections, the motivation. It's all there, who could have orchestrated something like this. And all I can say for Eric Swalwell is if you don't engage in that kind of behavior, you don't have to worry about this kind of thing.
And whether it was orchestrated or not, right? You take advantage of the political fire that is ongoing. And this goes to the Democrats also, right? That the laundry list of the long list of now I'm mixing up my metaphors. The long list of candidates that are running as that have basically no chance are now thinking like, okay, here's my opportunity to maybe earn some maybe have a better chance at getting to that governor's seat. It's still unlikely. I think what will end up happening is that we'll have a Republican, and then whether it's between current mayor of San Jose and Tom Steyer, who is spending who knows how much money on TV ads, is bombarding on TV ads, right? Unless Katie Porter can sort of come out the woodwork. It seems like Becerra and Villaraigosa are battling to try to win over the Latino population. Honestly, if my family hasn't really heard of him, then not that that's a test, but it's like if he doesn't have name recognition if they don't already have name recognition in the Latino community, they're not going to get very far. But it's a lot though. It's and then the question is, what is the impact on Hayward? I don't know if there will be any impact in the immediate. There is something to be said about, like, he is a current serving congressman at the moment. The staff, that's another thing we should say, is that the staff put out a statement saying that and they were, I should read the statement. I should find the statement and read it because it makes more sense that way. Let me find that real quick. This is exciting TV here.
We'll edit this part out. It's fine.
Yeah, we'll edit it out.
And by we, I mean you.
I will edit it out. Yeah. Let's see. So some of the top staff, I don't know how many of them have stepped away from their role, but they say, "We stand with our former colleagues and the other women who have come forward. We believe you should stand with them too. The behavior detailed in these reports is abhorrent, beneath the dignity of those serving in public office, and betrays the trust of all Californians." Then it goes on to sort of say that, not everyone there's going to be some staffers that don't have the ability to leave their jobs because they can't. And so they'll continue working, but it's not because they support the congressman or they believe that the congressman committed no wrongs. It's because it's literally their job and they can't find another job. Right. So I thought that was a really interesting statement from the staffers to put out at that time. And it says a lot, I think, in terms of just where he stands. And I think I don't know what happens in these cases. Does that mean effectively that the congressional district is not represented? I mean, he was not showing up. This is now where we get to pile on because he was not showing up to votes anyway. But does this effectively mean that our area, the area of Hayward and beyond in the congressional district that Swalwell represents, is effectively not being served in Congress for at least until we don't know if he's going to be expelled. We don't know if he's going to continue showing up to work. I don't know any of those details, and we'll have to kind of keep an eye and see.
Yeah, I mean, unless he's expelled, strictly speaking, he's still our rep. What he does with that is an open question. I mean, if you think of a similar case, we had Matt Gaetz had controversy swirling around him almost the last year or something before he decided to step away from Congress, and he just kept showing up to work. I mean, there's nothing. Your coworkers not liking you doesn't necessarily stop you from showing up to work. So, I think that's all that there is. I mean,
unless there's some criminal charges put forth, right, and he's arrested, then that would keep him from coming into work also.
And that's almost certainly not going to happen before at least the primary, let alone the actual. With how slow everything goes, that's a long way off at this point, I think. But yeah, I think it's very interesting. I know, again, to bring it back locally, we had a lot of people making comments, a lot of local politicians making comments against it. I know, I believe Mayor Salinas withdrew his endorsement. I believe it was withdrawing his endorsement. Trustee Austin Bruckner Carrillo also released a statement. He had not endorsed Swalwell in the first place, but just was encouraging everyone to listen to the victims and to respect their situation. And all of local unions had been jumping on the Swalwell train pretty consistently. Again, this is all at a state level for his gubernatorial campaign, but the fact that he was lining those up was putting him in a consistently better position as time went on. And they are withdrawing endorsements left, right, and center. So he is, even if he manages to hold on or decides not to suspend it, not to actually drop out of the race and decides to pick up again, I don't see a coalition of people who would back him at this point, unless, as you said, some sort of huge exoneration happened, in which case, honestly, he would just be insufferable at that point. But I hope justice is followed through no matter what happens. Obviously can't say, just
Yeah, definitely. And I think the speculation now in terms of what the governor's race looks like is, regardless of party,
Yeah.
there's the two top contenders that
Mhm.
are going to be filling that seat.
Mhm.
So could be Democrat, could be Republican. Those
Yeah.
the primary is going to see the top two vote getters are going to be your two choices come November, right?
Yeah, I think for us, the big concern, the big open question over the next few weeks is going to be who does the union, who do the unions rally around, and is that going to be mayhem? Probably not. But also, do you want to back the winning horse, or do you want to try and elevate somebody in like 2 weeks' time
Well,
after
Colin,
you've already printed all your material?
don't forget the California Federation of Labor. See, this is why you come to the Over the Loudspeaker Hayward Herald podcast. Don't forget that the labor did not just endorse one candidate for governor. They
They did a
endorsed
dual endorsement.
four. They did a four-way endorsement of the four different Democrats. So they have three left.
I mean,
Incredible.
that's the reason. That's the real reason, if you're in this race, to just like, to not drop out, is because you got endorsed anyway. I mean, all you got to do is show up, apparently.
All you got to do is
But
show up.
I mean,
So what I was going to say to sort of maybe close us out here is that
yeah.
what the speculation now is that I imagine that the top brass of California Democrats, and we know who those are:
Mhm.
Newsom, Pelosi,
Oh yeah.
Schiff.
Yeah.
They're going to be getting together and they're going to say, okay, who is our horse in this race? Who are we putting forth? Because right now it's a total shit show.
Yeah.
It is dumpster fire. It is a dumpster fire behind a Jack in the Box, completely ablaze. The fire department is not showing up anytime soon. This fire needs to be put out. I wouldn't be surprised if Pelosi, Newsom, the kingmakers got together in a room and said, okay, enough of this Democratic figuring out who's our candidate. We have to back a candidate. We have to put them forward, and that's that. And if they haven't
Yeah.
already done that, I'm if they're not having that thought yet, it would drive me mad, because I also wouldn't be surprised at sometimes how incompetent they can be at just, at
Well,
this
Nestor,
point.
you just gave them the playbook, because we all know that even that all the top brass around the state listen to Over the Loudspeaker.
Oh yeah, they're tuning in. They're like, taking notes.
Thank you for your viewership,
Yeah.
former Speaker Pelosi
Yeah.
and Governor Newsom.
Yeah, thank you for your service, girl boss. So yeah, it's unfortunate, in the sense that there's real victims here who were harmed by someone with a lot of political power, and unfortunately, uh, common. And the current president, is also so. And maybe the contradiction there, right, where Swalwell was positioning himself as I am the Trump battler, I am the one who's holding Trump accountable, but has the same skeletons in his own closet. And you can apply that to not just the sort of like kind of moral personal responsibility aspect, but also in the sense of like uh, there was consistent actions that were happening outside of his office for him to take a position on the ongoing genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And he never wavered. He remained committed. So and on the one hand, it has kind of nothing to do with it, but on the other hand, it has everything to do with if you are acting in private the way it's it's infuriating. It's sort of the full political system in the worst aspects of it, right? These folks who gain political power and hold high authority in office and act like they get to do whatever they want. And I think this is what we're seeing is what happens when those folks in power are held accountable, and actually people react to it, right? And it'd be interesting to see what if the president was ever held to accountable, right? And it's interesting because we didn't get to talk about it because we only do this show monthly, but there was also labor icon Cesar Chavez, who was taken down not that long ago, right? Just a few weeks ago, who victims came out, Dolores Huerta being one of those victims. So the public will no longer tolerate these figures of power saying one thing and doing the other. That's for sure, right? I think with Trump, it's saying, he's evil in all ways, and so people certainly that's just what he is. But I think when there's this sort of contradiction in which you are sort of saying one thing and doing the other thing behind closed doors, I don't think anyone has any tolerance for that, right? And I'm glad that these figures are being taken down.
I would agree with you, sir.
Collin, I was so excited about talking about this topic. I'm like sweating now. That we have a whole rest of the show where we're talking about urban ag, and as it relates to Hayward, and it's covering the in-person event, the topic that we were going to have in person that we weren't able to have, that was canceled due to some things we could not predict, so many circumstances. But we did a portion of it, a kind of maybe a little bit different than we would have done it in person, but we did it for the viewers of Over the Loudspeaker. We interviewed the professor Antonio from Cal State East Bay, talked about urban ag. So you'll find that at the end of this episode.
Actually, that's not true, because the episode is coming up right now after this short break. Have you subscribed to Over the Loudspeaker on YouTube yet? If you haven't, please push that bell icon, subscribe, like this video if you haven't had a chance to do it yet. It helps us reach other viewers in Hayward. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the episode.
Okay, so we're joined by Professor Antonio Roman-Alcalá, who's an educator, researcher, writer, musician, and organizer based in Berkeley, California, who has worked on sustainable food systems and radical political change for over 20 years. Antonio is currently an assistant professor at Cal State East Bay, teaching geography, environmental studies, researching movements for social and environmental justice through agroecology and food sovereignty. His previous efforts also include founding urban farms, civil society alliances, and activist researcher networks, and documentary filmmaking. Welcome, Professor Antonio, to Over the Loudspeaker. We're very happy to have you here. And what an amazing bio you have. It's very well-rounded, from music to documentary filmmaking to urban ag. It's really exciting to have you here.
Thank you. Well, I feel like, a well-lived life is one that is not narrow and boring. So
very true. And
creative activities as well.
I think we also have that same motto here at the Hayward Herald, where we're trying to do, I think, a lot of things at once. I think we'll just start by I'll ask you a little bit about your background and just what is some of the focus of your work at Cal State East Bay over the past 2 decades. And maybe we can start there. What is it that you currently do at Cal State East Bay, and what's your focus there?
Well, as any other tenure track professor, my focus is teaching, right? We have to teach 4 classes a semester roughly, and those run the gamut from, as you mentioned, geography topics. So I'm teaching a world regional geography class to environmental studies. This semester I'm teaching, for example, one of the classes I really like, sustainability and social justice. So looking sort of at the big picture of systems that humans live in and how those generate sustainability or social justice or their opposites. So I do a lot of teaching, That's what I spend the bulk of my time doing. But of course, I have to be involved in other things. And so I am also involved in research. Currently, I'm doing a little bit of research when I get the time around recent moves at the California state politics level around what is being called land equity. So essentially the inequality in land access for agriculture in particular, and how the state is interested increasingly in how to address that. So I'm studying that. And I do a number of other projects sort of outside of directly my teaching. So whether that's working with this UC-based network called CORE, which stands for California's Organic, Agroecological, and Regenerative Transitions. So it's about looking at how California is transitioning to more sustainable kinds of food production and food systems. And I also organize a monthly gathering outside of the university space, sort of a community space for political education and community building around topics of agroecology and food sovereignty.
Great. And maybe, there was a lot there, I think. And I think for maybe the average viewer or person who turns in, can you talk a little bit about what's the difference between, say, agriculture at large, right? And then this sort of what seems to be very specific around urban agriculture, and maybe the relationship, I think, for a lot of folks, maybe think about agriculture as something that's far removed from them, especially for those of us who live in more urban settings and say like, oh, agriculture doesn't happen here, it happens elsewhere. Can you break that down a little bit more and allow folks to kind of think about what their relationship to agriculture might be?
For sure. I mean, I think, it's hard as an academic not to want to speak in big picture terms. So for example, historically, we can't understand today in our lives today with an assumption that agriculture has always been rural as opposed to urban, because in fact, the history of agriculture comes alongside concentrations of human beings taking up residence close together in a place we would call urban. So urban agriculture is nothing new in a way. People, wherever they have been, sedentary lives around the world, there has been food production of various sorts close by to that. But of course, to speak about today, we essentially live in a world that is composed of more or less two kinds of food systems. People like us who live in what they call an advanced country, basically a rich and industrialized country, tend to be very separated from food production, and food production happens out there in the rural landscape. And we're mostly in cities, and we're basically see ourselves as consumers more than anything else. We eat food that we buy, and that's what we know about food. Whereas for the majority of the population of the planet, the people in what we might call the majority world, meaning the poorer countries of the world that make up the majority of the population of the planet, those people rely on what we call the peasant food web. So they're more often people who are already rural themselves, or even if they are urban, they are connected to food production often much more directly. Sometimes they lead lives where they live part of the year in an urban space for access to jobs to earn cash income, and then spend other parts of the year on farms or in other food production facilities. So this is all to say that our experiences in a place like Hayward or the United States is actually not the norm necessarily of how humans have lived historically, or how they even live today in much of the world.
Or even in the past, Hayward just celebrated its 150th anniversary since it's been founded, and I think Hayward was largely agricultural when it, and very population-wise wasn't as dense or as populated as it is now, obviously, but mostly agricultural. A huge canning industry in the region. So I think a much closer relation to the production of food than at least in recent memory. And so maybe,
very true.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and sort of like that transition. It seems like it has happened in the last couple of decades, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the transition can be traced over a longer period, right? There's, of course, the sort of the effects of the development of the system we live in today, economically called capitalism, which has divorced people from what we call directly accessing the means of production, meaning we don't own land for the most part where we grow food for ourselves. Instead, we are more often people who have to sell our labor to someone to earn a wage to then turn around and buy food. So that's not in the last couple of decades, that's over the last centuries, 3 to 5 centuries, the development of this particular relationship to food. Um, but more recently, what we know of is the development of what we might call the industrial farming system. So essentially, the early 20th century, the increasing reliance on fossil fuel-based fertilizers, which became a possibility after these guys, Haber and Bosch, developed this thing, the Haber-Bosch process, that converts essentially atmospheric nitrogen into a form that can be used as a fertilizer. So this, combined with mechanization and combined with the sort of transformation across a lot of places around the world where you had a large, what we call a peasant class, basically people who produce food as their main livelihood. A lot of those folks were basically forced in various ways into cities to become wage laborers. So you have a hollowing out of the rural landscape, a reduction in the rural population in many sections of the world, and an increase of this kind of concentrated form of agriculture where it's no longer being done by small and medium scale farms, usually run on mostly family kinds of labor, to a more mechanized, industrialized, and capitalized kind of farming system where you really rely on wage labor for the labor of that farm. And that is all to say that these transformations away from old forms of food production and into the industrial model really both, of course, changed how food is produced, but it also changed how we as consumers, again, relate to food, because now we sort of expect it to be done outside of where we live and also to be done cheap enough, meaning at a low cost that we get cheap goods, right? And we see food production as sort of a burden and a thing that people don't want to do. And so we want it to be sort of as far away from us as people as possible. And I think this is another thing that people who are in the minority world, like the United States, don't realize, that actually around the world, people like being food producers. People get a lot of value out of the process of relating to non-human nature and gaining a sustenance for themselves, for their families, and for their communities from that in an ethical and ecological way. And we sort of assume that it's a burdensome thing, but that's really more a condition of the industrial food system, because you can imagine being a farm worker in the Central Valley today, right? Picking thousands of bunches of cilantro as fast as you can, not so fun compared to going out to your home or community scale farm where you're managing, a little bit of cilantro and then a little bit of, tomate and then some other things, right? There's a different way that agriculture looks when it's not being done in this industrial system. And so, yeah, today I think people sort of mostly assume, I know my students assume that industrial agriculture feeds the world when in fact it is not the main producer of the food that the world population eats. And we assume that people don't want to do agriculture, and neither of those things is true.
So when we're talking about differentiating maybe what we would consider urban ag to like gardening, is it just a question of scale, or if I'm engaged in like gardening in my backyard, am I all of a sudden like an agricultural, am I a farmer? I don't necessarily equate that as that, but how do you differentiate the two?
Well, I guess I would put urban agriculture as this umbrella term where basically anything that happens in a thing that looks to you like a city is urban, and if it's producing food, it's agriculture. So yes, you having a few containers on your balcony in an apartment, growing a few little things, that's a form of urban agriculture. Obviously, there's consequential differences between different kinds of agriculture. And so if we're talking about the sort of productivity of larger amounts of food, then certainly there are forms of urban agriculture that more look like farming, quote unquote, as opposed to something that is more gardening. And so we see, for example, the big contrast I would say here is we know there's projects called community gardens, right, where individuals have their little plots and they grow whatever they want in those plots. And I've seen many times that community gardens, because people go there for various reasons, they might be growing flowers for ornament, they might not have enough time and not keep up their plot very well, right? So you might have pretty low productivity in a community garden. In contrast, there are projects like the one that I helped start 20 years ago in San Francisco called Alamini Farm, other projects of a similar sort across the East Bay, across the Bay Area really, where people come together and they collectively commit to growing food together, often have people who are in positions that have knowledge about food production, and they manage decisions and manage sites in a way where a large amount of food is actually producible by working together, slightly larger scales, right? The farm in San Francisco is 3 acres of land, probably about less than an acre in actual production, but they grow a substantial amount, tens of thousands of pounds of food per year. So the point is, urban agriculture can actually be pretty productive, but certainly there are many kinds, right? There's people just doing whatever they can in their backyard. There's things like tree parks, right? Parks where fruit trees have been planted instead of just ornamental trees. So you can have food production that really is ornamental and just kind of mixed into a park atmosphere, right? There are many ways that food can be produced alongside urban habitation.
I think that may be a good part to follow up on in terms of the difference between producing for the sake of something that you're going to consume, like food, and more ornamental gardening, or maybe the agricultural production of things that aren't necessarily to be consumed or to be eaten, but maybe useful in other ways. What are some advantages or disadvantages to solely producing just food and then producing maybe things that are not meant to be eaten, but maybe bring in some value in some way to communities? Is there a balance to be had there, or is one more important than the other?
Certainly, I would be one to advocate for balance. I mean, the reason why I got into this work in the first place, right, is because that industrial food production model and system that I was talking about earlier is absolutely atrocious, both in terms of the environmental impact and the ways it treats human beings within it. And so clearly we need to come up with a different way of producing food that is not narrowly about the highest yields possible at all costs. Because that's essentially what profit-driven industrial agriculture cares about. Doesn't care about the soil, doesn't care about the workers. So when I assess sort of like the value of urban agriculture, I am of course thinking about food as one component, but in a balance of other kinds of outputs that urban agriculture can provide. One of those is just recognizing that when we as humans steward non-human nature, we can facilitate and support other kinds of beings that are not humans. And so the basic idea here is, for example, native plants that are interspersed into a food garden that attract locally suited kinds of pollinator species, support non-European bee species, for example, and that lend themselves to actually supporting the wider ecology of beings that we exist in the urban environment with. So I would not say that you should not plant a native plant because it's not producing enough food for humans, right? It's about what is your relative goal in terms of food production versus other things. But of course, right, I'm not personally a person who focuses on growing flowers for the sake of beauty, but a lot of people find beauty in growing different crops, plants, flowers, etc. And that cannot be denied as an important value of creating spaces of beauty in our urban lands. And then, of course, there's a lot of social outcomes that come from farming. And so I think that, yes, food is important, but it's really a case-by-case basis, sort of what kind of community is it? What are the things that they are most lacking in or need, So for some communities, right, there might not be such a sort of food security issue where people don't have access to enough food or to healthy food, and therefore food might be part of what is being produced, but it's more about community cohesion or education, and so on, right? So each case is slightly different, and I definitely don't think we should just make a blanket judgment about what should be produced or grown on urban farms.
And I'm going to contradict myself. I agree, but is there if you were to say, is there an MVP in the Bay Area of most valuable plant in terms of what it would do to restore maybe the ecology of the Bay Area, or is there one plant that sort of stands out to you, or that you're saying like, oh, if folks, this would balance out. I don't even know what it is. I don't have enough expertise to even know what I'm asking,
Yeah, so that's the thing. So the term agroecology means a lot of things to a lot of people. So I use that term in this interview already, and a lot of people probably don't know what it is. But essentially you can think, right, agriculture and ecology. one of the things you learn when you study agroecology is the place-based nature of the best agroecological system, meaning that the reason why it contrasts so much with the industrial model, which is basically a recipe that you just apply these certain things and you grow these narrow number of crops wherever you are on the planet, right? And agroecology, in contrast, says, look, we're in a specific place with a specific climate, with a specific human population, with different cultures, with values, with culinary traditions. So we'd want to select very, very tentatively to that specificity. And so in the case of supporting the non-human ecology, that is so place-based that I couldn't give you a single plant. There are yarrow species that are great across a number of counties in the Bay Area. Yarrow is a great plant. It attracts beneficials. It's really a good plant. It grows easily. But even within yarrow, there are a bunch of narrow species for certain areas that certain bugs have evolved alongside that wouldn't be the same in another place, right? It gets very, very detailed when you get to that level of actually learning local ecologies. Now, in terms of food production and sort of like the human desire to have a healthy and organic form of producing food, there is a crop plant that I would point to, which is the fava bean, right? Vicia faba, which is a Mediterranean crop, so not from the Americas originally, but that grows really, really well and really, really easily here in the Bay Area, produces a delicious food called the fava bean, but also is really, really helpful because it's a legume and it has the ability to partner with soil bacteria, which can fix nitrogen from the air and put it in the soil, basically improve your soil for other plants to grow while you grow it. And so in that way, we can see how one plant, which can produce for humans, also creates conditions that are conducive to more life. It can do the fertilization of your soil the way that you don't need a fossil fuel fertilizer. And so the fava bean is one of my favorite crops. It's something we grow every year at the garden at CSU East Bay, in the school garden that I helped start there. And so I recommend it for anyone, especially who's new to gardening, because it's almost impossible to fail at growing fava beans.
And for folks who are maybe listening to this and they're saying, I've never gardened before, I've never been involved in farming at all, even though I think it's funny because I think a lot of folks, especially folks who are immigrants, but even immigrant in the very broad term, if you're migrating from the south of the US, right, you weren't so far removed from the production of food, right? And maybe one or two generations, but maybe find themselves now completely removed from that, but are looking to find ways back in. What would you recommend? And maybe a two-part is what sort of systems can be put in place to sort of help support folks grow their own food or get involved in urban ag in a way that's sustainable and equitable as well. And it's sort of a loaded question there, but
yeah. Well, I mean, regarding the first, I mean, I have students who are often the children of migrants or sometimes grandchildren, and who have spoken to me about the fact that they know that someone in their family has a passion for food production, on their off work hours, growing small gardens, and usually it's almost always being done organically, because these are sort of the traditions and values from the folks they're descended from. And it's interesting because so few of them have actually consciously tried to pick up and take up and learn those skills from their ancestors, from their elders. And so I do think it's an important thing to do. And I think the first step is to ask yourself, do I have anyone in my community who already is doing this, right? It doesn't have to be in your family. It could be literally your neighbor. It could be someone you know who runs a project down the road, right? So finding those key people who are passionate about food production and already have knowledge and skills, that's literally how I started doing urban farming. I essentially apprenticed in an informal way with a couple of gardeners I met in San Francisco. And the other thing is there are organized sort of efforts that go across a number of places, right? So you can find, again, community gardens that your city or county will be running, sign up on a wait list usually if they're already full for your own plot, and just learn by experimenting. there are resources in different places. In Berkeley, you have the Ecology Center. San Francisco has the Garden for the Environment. The East Bay, you can learn at places like Spiral Gardens, or again, the Gill Track Community Farm up in Albany. Acton and Verba might have some programs. So there's various places, right, where there are urban farms that do workshops, that do various kinds of trainings, and you can find out about those availabilities. Often they're free or cheap. And then a third resource is the UC Master Gardeners program. So the UC system, the University of California, has what's called extension services. Those are normally made to serve what we call real farmers, people who are farming for economic livelihood. But we also have this network of what are called master gardeners, so people who are trained and know a lot about gardening for your particular zone, meaning they know about the climate where you live, the soils where you live, what plants work, what varieties of say, fruit trees work. So you can get a lot out of both consulting with existing master gardeners and also taking different trainings that master gardeners tend to provide. And because it's a governmental service, I can't say for sure now in this funding environment, but generally what I remember many years ago is that most of those programs are free because they're meant to support the public to learn these things. So what I would say is that already you have many resources at your disposal. And this is, setting aside YouTube University and all the other freely available ways you could try to learn gardening. But I would always say triangulate if you're going to use sources like YouTube, because, it's best to know people who are actually working on producing food where you live. But to your second question, even though these resources do exist, I'm definitely a believer that governments, particularly city and county governments, should be doing more to support people's capacity to grow their own food. And I know that in San Francisco, I was part of an effort that one of the alliances mentioned in my bio, the San Francisco Urban Agriculture Alliance, which was a bunch of projects that came together. We actually changed city law, and part of that change was to create an urban agriculture program that the city now funds to provide compost and starts a few times a year, as well as do educational workshops and basically support both home gardeners and the various urban agriculture organized projects to help them succeed. And so, if that such a thing does not exist, you can also work on campaigns locally. I think Hayward, at least my understanding is that the Hayward city policy structure is pretty interested in urban agriculture and at least doesn't have a lot of resistance to it. And so there might be some advocacy that could be done to generate more of that kind of support locally as well.
And maybe this last question to wrap up with, in terms of, especially given the context that we're all living in now around sustainability, the use of fossil fuels, I think the ongoing war in Iran has sort of woken a lot of people up in terms of, just around the prices of gas, but also the rising cost of food and basic things. Is there, beyond the interest of folks who say I'm interested in this as a hobby, but is there practical reasons to be engaged in urban farming at this moment, given the historical context that we're all sort of living through, and, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I will say there is an unfortunate and maybe promising pattern in the United States where crises, namely wars, beget an explosion in urban agriculture. So we saw this World War I, World War II with what were called the victory gardens that sprouted up. We saw this in the 2008 financial crisis, also the 1970s financial crisis and oil price crisis, as well as during the pandemic, right? And the thing is, what we need to see is that, yes, our existing food systems are incredibly dependent on fossil fuels in many ways, but especially fundamentally, as I mentioned, the fertilizers that come from fossil fuels, 20% of which emerge out of the Strait of Hormuz. So it's not just gas that's being sent around, it's actually fertilizers that run this industrial global food system. And so getting away from that dependency is essential over the long term if we're going to create sustainable food systems of any sort. We can't be burning fossil fuels forever, and we can't be relying on this industrial food model. So urban agriculture is Of course, not going to replace entirely all of that food produced, but it can certainly mitigate some of our dependency on those industrial food chains. So in my view, urban agriculture is always a part of the solution to transforming the food system towards more sustainability. And again, we can do it on a local scale as communities and as individuals in ways that don't depend on fossil fuels very much, and that are productive of food we actually need to eat. So that's one thing. But of course, a more fundamental thing in my view is that urban agriculture, let's say, gets rid of some of this ignorance that we are trained into as people of this kind of society, to not care and not know about food production, and to think, oh, someone else is handling it over there, and then only to worry about it when all of a sudden the prices of eggs go up and you're saying, oh, I have no other option but to buy this food from the store. Well, right, maybe you should think about your dependency when you're not in a crisis and do something about it to avoid getting yourself back into that situation. And so I think that it behooves everybody to get more educated about food systems and food sources, not just to sort of vote with your fork and buy the better stuff, but to actually understand how we might transition away from that dependency in that model. And urban agriculture is one component, but of course we need to transform the way that land is managed here in California, in the Central Valley, in the Imperial Valley, along the, in the Salinas Valley, where all this lettuce and strawberries come from, right? We can't allow the system to just kind of continue until crises happen. We need to proactively actually change laws, policies, ways we manage farmland as a human species. And so I think that's, it's a big thing to change. It's not going to change overnight, but we should remember that, again, there's about 10,000 years of human history of growing food in the thing we call agriculture, only about 100 years in this industrial model, and about 200 plus thousand years before then, when we actually survived from a deep ecological knowledge of place, what we derogatorily usually call hunting and gathering. And so we should remember that as humans, we have a deep capacity to get food from the landscape and to interact with the landscape in a way that is ecological. And it's only more recently that we've stopped doing that. And we could not say easily, but definitely conceivably go back the other direction.
I think that's a great note to end on. And I want to thank you, Professor Antonio, for spending some time with us. And I want to encourage our folks who listen in on YouTube or on the Hayward Herald page, or who are reading some of the stuff on Hayward Herald. If you are interested in hearing more about this topic, I think it'd be great to have you back to talk more about these issues. I know I have a ton more questions that I would like to ask, and I would have taken us on far wide tangents if I had the chance, but I was respecting the time, your time, and the time of our audience here. So thanks again for joining. And what if folks wanted to learn more about what the work you're doing, how could they find out more about you or your work?
Yeah, I actually do have a recently somewhat revamped personal webpage. So it's just myname.com, no spaces, no hyphens, no accents. And that's the best way. And I actually have updates recently. For example, I have a book coming out in mid-July. And so I'll definitely be happy to come back on and talk more about urban farming, talk about the book, etc.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm happy to continue the conversation. I do think, of course, half an hour is enough to touch the surface level of what's going on with urban farming, but there's so many things we could talk about for sure.
Yeah, thanks again.